So hello everybody. This is Ajahn Brahm back here now. And well, Venerable Canda was doing the loving kindness meditation. I was just finishing off preparing for the sutta this afternoon. So the sutta this afternoon we did flag that's going to be the Anatta Lakkhana sutta. And that was the second sutta which the Buddha taught. And it was the Sutta, the teachings, which created the first set of enlightened disciples, fully enlightened. So I always regarded it as a very important and powerful teaching of the Buddha. And when I had the privilege of doing a 6-month silent retreat many years ago, that was the sutta which I took with me into the retreat kuti, and that's all I did. Just chanted that sutta, contemplated it, did lots of meditation, and was just silent for 6 months. I found that a very, very, very powerful teaching of the Buddha. So it was extremely helpful, very powerful, it's got great reputation. So because of that, I chose that that's the one I'm going to teach this afternoon. So because I revere it, I'm going to just do a Namo Tassa first of all. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Now, with the teachings which you will come across, sometimes a lot of importance should be given to accurate translation, accurate renderings. And I'm not quite sure if you have had a look at those translations in the books which you may have read, but there'll always be a few changes. And so this is my recommended translation, and I was just discussing some of those translations with Venerable Canda and sort of agreeing on some of those new translations. So I'll be interrupting the discourse with explaining some of those translations. But let's get started. This is the 59th sutta in the 22nd section of the Samyutta Nikaya, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One, the Buddha, was dwelling at Varanasi, in the deer park of Isipatana. There the Blessed One addressed the monks, the monastics of the group of 5, thus: Monks, Venerable Sir, those monks replied, and the Buddha said this: Monks, body is not a self. For if, monks, body were a self, this body would not lead to any trouble, and it would possibly be possible to have it. It'd be possible to have it to form the body. Sorry, so I've just been crossing things out and adding things here. I will start again. Monks, body is not a self. For if body were a self, this body would not lead to any trouble, and it would be possible to have it of the body. Let the body be thus, let the body not be thus. But because the body is not a self, body leads to trouble, and it is not possible to have it of body. Let my body be thus, let my body be thus. Body is the first khanda. The word for body, rupa, can mean other things as well, but in this context, it was specifically pointing to this physical body, which we each have in one form or another. Number 2, Vedana, which many people translate as feeling, and I was discussing with Venerable Canda how the much more accurate translation, instead of feeling, is experience. Feeling is a factor of experience, a type of experience. But the real meaning of Vedana means experience in general. And that's one of the reasons why, when you read Translate and get closer to the original meaning, it does become far more powerful. So experience is not a self. For if monks experience were a self, this experience would not lead to trouble, and it would be possible to have it of experience. Let my experience be thus, let my experience not be thus. But because experience is not a self, experience leads to trouble, and it is not possible to have it of experience. Let my experience be thus, let my experience not be thus. And the third kanda, perception. Perception is not a self, for if Mark's perception were a self, perception would not lead to any trouble, and it would be possible to have it of perception. Let my perception be thus, let my perception not be thus. But because perception is not a self, perception leads to affliction, and it is not possible to have it of perception. Let my perception be thus, let my perception not be thus. The fourth kanda, sankhara. Will is not a self. For if monks' will were the self, then the self will not lead. Sorry, if will were a self, then will would not lead to affliction, and would be possible to have it of will. Let my will be thus, let my will not be thus. But because will is not a self, will leads to affliction or to trouble, and it's not possible to have it of will. Let my will be thus, let my will not be thus. The fifth kanda, consciousnesses, plural, are not a self. For if monks' consciousnesses were a self, these consciousnesses would not lead to any trouble, and it would be possible to have it of consciousnesses. Let my consciousnesses be thus, let my consciousnesses not be thus. But because consciousnesses are not self, consciousnesses lead to affliction, and it is not possible to have it of consciousnesses. Let my consciousnesses be thus, let my consciousnesses not be thus. And this is the first part of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. And you may have obviously noted that some of those translations, actually out of the 5 of my translations, are different from what you may have heard before. First of all, instead of saying form, that takes it too far away from the original meaning, and it is specifically directed to the bodily part of a person's life. And the second, I already mentioned experience, that is much closer to the original meaning of Vedana, and also it is much more powerful. It's not just the happiness, the unhappiness, or in between, and every one of the senses has a different word for the pleasant, unpleasant, and in between. It's just experience in general, having a sense. Perception, as you know, is well known by human beings, and you may notice that sometimes it gets distorted. We've often said that you see what you want to see, and you blot out what you don't want to see. And when you see anything, feel anything, are you feeling what is truth, what is real, or how does that perception work? And the sankhara, I will give the definition of sankhara from one of the suttas in a few moments. But by translating it as will, again, it becomes far more powerful. And lastly, the consciousnesses. Each one of your 6 consciousnesses is different, is separate, can be independent. The mind consciousness also comes and goes. It is not some underlying reality on which the other 5 senses depend. It comes, it goes. And I will be explaining that later. But each one of these 5 khandas, the Buddha was saying that because they're not part of a self, basically you don't own them. So you can't even wish, oh, may my consciousness be like this, or my will be like this. All these things are natural phenomena which are caused. A good example of that, the last few days I've seen Venerable Canda very kindly trying to revive some of the plants which she lovingly looked after. But then during the hot weather, while she was looking after me, going teaching in many different places in London and Brighton, many of those plants suffered during the heat. And because of those, that some of them have been very damaged. But it just kind of shows you that you wish they didn't get damaged, but they're like your consciousness, like a plant. Sometimes when you realize you don't own these things, you don't really control them, you can ameliorate things, you can lessen the damage, but you can't really control these things. And you always feel that, say, experience. Oh, that my experience would be like this. Oh, would my experience not be like this? And you can't do that because they're out of your command, out of your power. And that became one of the first of the teachings, which when I read that and contemplated that, it wasn't a teaching I liked. It was a teaching which was very clear and allowed me to let go when I was on my 6-month silent retreat where I never saw anybody. It allowed me to abandon control. It allowed me just to be. And the retreat got so peaceful because of that. Now, the Buddha continues in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, and now I'm going to use the translation which I have in the word of the Buddha. So it starts off. Next part of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. What do you think? Does the body persist or disintegrate? Buddha is still asking the 5 monks. It disintegrates, Venerable Sir. Is what disintegrates suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what disintegrates, if what disintegrates is suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus? This is mine, this is I am. This is mine, this I am, this is a permanent essence. No, Venerable Sir. And this is an argument the Buddha is now going to use for the other 4 of the 5 khandas, asking, does it persist or disintegrate? Understanding its anicca. And instead of just saying impermanent, I've used the appropriate word for each different one of the 5 khandas. So it does it last or does it disappear? But we would only say, like, persist or disintegrate to something like the body, and to experience, persist or disappear, and perception, persist or change, will stay the same or come and go and alter. Consciousness is constant or changing. It's the same word, but when that word is linked to a different one of the khandas, you use a different expression. This is something which I learnt from, this is Professor A.K. Warder, who I really enjoyed listening to or reading. And he always said that if you are translating, you never translate word by word. You translate phrase by phrase. So you use a different word for the different one of the khandas. So what do you think? Does form persist, disintegrate? It disintegrates, Venerable Sir. Is what disintegrates suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what disintegrates and is suffering, is that and subject to change? Is that fit to be regarded as this is mine? This I am. This is a permanent essence? No, Venerable Sir. Does experience persist or disappear? It disappears, Venerable Sir. If what disappears, suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. If what disappears and is suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, this I am, this is a permanent essence. Do you actually own your experience? Can you really keep it? Or does even your memory of it fade and disappear? Does perception persist or change? It changes, Venerable Sir. Is what changes suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. If what it changes and is suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus, this is mine, this I am, this is a permanent essence. No, Venerable Sir. Does will stay the same or come, go, and alter? It comes, goes, and alters, Venerable Sir. Is what comes and goes and alters suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what comes and goes and alters is suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine, this I am, this is a permanent essence, no, Venerable Sir. Our consciousnesses constant or our consciousnesses constant or changing? Always changing, Venerable Sir. Is what is changing always, is that suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what is in constant suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine, this I am, this is a permanent essence. No, Venerable Sir. That particular argument there, if we, if we want something to be real happiness, permanent happiness, bliss, then if it keeps on changing and it's out of your control, is that really fit to be regarded as happiness? Or is that obviously suffering? It disintegrates, changes. Anything which changes, it will either get better or it get worse. That's what change means. So it's never any type of permanent happiness. And then the statement the translation which I had here about non-self. What is the meaning of that non-self? This is mine. You own it. This is your possessions. This is who you're. This is who you're. This is who you identify with. This I am. And who are you? Or rather, who do you take yourself to be? And a permanent essence was my long translation of the word soul, self, me. If this permanent essence, that which is underlying everything, which does not change, which is right inside there, and is the foundation of your sense of existence. I love calling it a permanent essence, because if it's not permanent, it's not your essence. A good description or simile for that, because I was a scientist, still am a scientist, you always thought that the atom. And for those of you who have any knowledge of ancient Greek, they use the word atom for the essential, indivisible, eternal particle from which other stuff is made up. And that's how people believed it at the time. It was permanent essence from that everything is produced or built up from. That actually meant indivisible. That was the whole meaning of the word. And that's why the science community gave that word, to sort of very, very small stuff from which things are made up. And that was when the genius Rutherford managed to split the unsplittable, divide the indivisible, to split the atom. And to this day, I've always wondered why the word atom is so close to the Pali word atma. And when we think that the atma is an indivisible thing which makes up all beings, or a paramatma, or any other type of atma, then we are doing the same which the scientists did to stuff, to things. And the Buddha just was pointing out that this thing which you try and find as an atma or an atta, that such a thing doesn't exist. We try and assume this to be a permanent essence. If it's not permanent, it's not an essence. If it's not an essence, it's not permanent. When it's not a permanent essence, there cannot be anything owning or controlling this. The mind has disappeared. And that was the second part of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. And the third part of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, this is now on the bottom of page 17 of the Word of the Buddha here. Any kind of body, whatever, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near. This is the body kanda, the body component of existence. All bodies should be seen as they really are, with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not a permanent essence. Any kind of experience, Vedana, whatever, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near. This is the experience, Vedana, component of existence. And all experience should be seen as it really is, with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not a permanent essence. Any kind of perception whatever, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near. This is the perception component of existence. All perception should be seen as it really is, with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not a permanent essence. Any kind of will and other mental formations, whatever, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near. This is the will and mental formations component of existence. All will should be seen as they really are, with correct wisdom thus: this is not mine. This I am not. This is not a permanent essence. And now the last of the 5 khandas. Any kind of consciousness whatever, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, this is the consciousness's component of existence. And all consciousnesses should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus: this is not mine. This I am not. This is not a permanent essence. And that was almost the last part of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. All that remained of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta was the summary and the declaration that those 5 monks became fully enlightened. To go deeper into the components of existence, the 5 khandas, what is the body component of existence? Here the Buddha said it's the 4 great elements and the physical qualities derived by the 4 great elements. The 4 great elements, he said, were earth, water, fire, and air element. And for a long time as a scientist, I rebelled against that because basically it was just not true. There's much more to it. And even when sometimes people start to include, we can include just the kind of the meaning of those 4 great elements, it's still not accurate. But that didn't matter to me because the form component of existence, in other words, that which your body is made up of, it's a waste of time calling it the 3 quarks and all the different variations of those quarks combined together into so many ways. I think that's almost still the most agreed upon idea of what stuff is, what matter is. But nevertheless, to be able to relate this thing which we call body and the atoms, and not just atoms, subatomic particles and everything else which is made out of, to see it's just a few things which interconnect, play around together, and form this idea of what a body is experienced as. And Vedana, what it says here is there are 3 types of experience. What are the 3? Pleasant experience of any one of the 6 senses, unpleasant, and neither unpleasant nor unpleasant, neutral experience through any of the 6 senses. These are the 3 types of experience. Doesn't say very much. But nevertheless, we know actually that experience, what it's pointing to, is just that how we existence, how we relate to the things which happen in life. It's not just the things which do the relating, it's the living of the life and the experience we have living in this life. And of course, there are pleasant, unpleasant, saying neutral, exactly what is neutral. It's trying to include everything as best we possibly can. And next we have the perception component of existence. What is perception? 6 kinds of perception. Perceptions of sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, and perceptions of mental objects. What are the sankharas? There are these 6 kinds of volition: will regarding sights, will regarding sounds, will regarding smells, will regarding taste, will regarding touches, and will regarding mental objects. It doesn't say that much. And then we get to the consciousnesses component of existence. What are consciousnesses? There are 6 types of consciousness: sight consciousness, hearing consciousness, smell, taste, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. And in Buddhism, And we kind of understand that each one of those consciousnesses are separate entities, call it entity if you wish, and by separate entities, to make the idea clear, I used the best simile which I could make up, which is not totally great, but it's all I had, was the fruit salad simile. So suppose you're sitting at your dinner table, and on the plate in front of you, there's a big coconut. And then suddenly that coconut disappears, and then there's an apple. And then the apple disappears, and another coconut, and the coconut disappears, another apple, another coconut, another apple, and maybe then there's a banana. And that banana disappears, and there's another coconut, another banana, another coconut. And that's kind of the fruit salad simile. And the coconut stands for mind consciousness. The apple stands for eye consciousness, the apple of the eye. I also use the cauliflower for the ear, because I know just young men fighting will have cauliflower ears. Their nose will smell, obviously. And you get the idea of the simile. Every one of your consciousnesses of the five senses is always followed by the consciousness of the mind, by the coconut. And that is why we know that we saw. We know that we heard. And sometimes the coconut is followed by another coconut. We know that we knew. And that is sensory experience and how consciousness works. And the fascinating thing about that is once you see it mindfully and clearly, you notice that you don't have any single form of consciousness lasting for very long. Every form of consciousness, has its kind of end, and then another form of consciousness arises. And even mind consciousness, that only lasts a small time, and another form of mind consciousness arises. Another form of consciousness comes. It's not continuous. So to prove this, or to actually, as the Buddha taught it, the dependent origination of consciousness. If the sense of knowing, mind, is intact, but no mind objects come into its range, then there is no manifestation of mind consciousness. If the sense of knowing is intact, mind object comes into its range, but there's no conscious engagement, then again there's no manifestation of mind consciousness. But when the sense of knowing is intact, mind objects come into its range, and there is conscious engagement, then the mind consciousness manifests. It's not always there. It comes into being. And so with the other five senses and the origination, each of their own type of consciousness. Consciousness is reckoned by the particular condition dependent upon which it arises. When consciousness arises dependent on sight and visual objects, it is reckoned as sight consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on hearing and sounds, it is reckoned as hearing consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on smell and odors, it is reckoned as smell consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on taste and flavors, it is reckoned as taste consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on touch and tangibles, it is reckoned as touch consciousness. When consciousness arises dependent on the mind and mind objects, it is reckoned as mind consciousness. Whatsoever the mind consciousness. And then to go even deeper, whatever there is of body, this belongs to the form component of existence. Whatsoever there is of experience, this belongs to the experience component of existence. Whatsoever there is of perception, this belongs to the perception component of existence. And whatever there is of will and other mental formations, this belongs to the will component of existence. And whatsoever there is of consciousnesses, this belongs to the consciousnesses component of existence. So here the Buddha is actually saying that these five khandas, they are all encompassing. Dependency, I should actually mention this. What is the sankhara component of existence? The definition of sankhara is the six types of will involved with the objects of the six senses. That's Samyutta Nikaya 2256. Though someone might say, apart from the form, the body, apart from experience, apart from perception, apart from will, I will make known the coming and going of consciousnesses, their passing away and rebirth, their growth, increase, and expansion. That is impossible. Just as two sheaves of reeds, a farming simile, just as two sheaves of reeds might stand leaning against each other, so too with the objects of consciousnesses, that's basically nama rupa, as a condition, consciousnesses come to be. With consciousness as a condition, the object of consciousnesses come to be. If one were to remove one of those sheaves of reeds, the other would fall. So too with the cessation of consciousnesses, the objects of consciousness cease to exist. With the cessation of the objects of consciousness, consciousnesses cease to exist. Vijnana can never be permanent. And to give, how we go? To give another simile, which is here, which is if you have difficulty comprehending all of that, this simile of the five khandas is far more easy. This is one of the Buddha's similes. That's why similes are always very helpful. Suppose that this river Ganges, said the Buddha, was carrying along a great lump of foam, and a person with good sight would inspect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to them to be void, hollow, and empty. For what solidity could one find in a mere lump of foam? So too, whatever kind of body there is, whether past, future, or present, one own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, you expect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to you to be void, empty, insubstantial. For what solidity could there be in foam? Suppose it were raining and big raindrops are falling, and a water bubble arises and bursts on the surface of the water. A person with good sight would inspect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to them to be void, hollow, and momentary. For what permanence could there be in a water bubble? So too, whatever kind of experience there is, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, you inspect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to you to be void, empty, and momentary. For can anything constant be found in experience? Suppose that in the last month of the hot season, around noon, a shimmering mirage appears. A person with good sight would inspect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to them to be void, hollow, and illusory. For what reality could there be in a mirage? So too, whatever kind of perception there is, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, you inspect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to you to be void, empty, and illusory. For what reality could there be in perception? Suppose a person needing hardwood would take a chainsaw and enter a forest. There they would see the trunk of a large banana tree, straight, fresh, without a fruit bud core. They would cut it down at the root, cut it off at the crown, and unroll the coil. As they unroll the coil, they would not find even softwood, let alone hardwood. A person with good sight would inspect and carefully investigate it, and would appear to them to be void, hollow, without a base. For what basis could there be in the trunk of a banana tree? So too, whatever kind of will there is, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, you inspect it and carefully investigate it. As you investigate them, it appears to you to be void, empty, and hollow. For what underlying basis could there be in volition? Suppose that a magician would form a trick at a crossroads. A person with good eyesight would inspect it and ponder it and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to them to be void, hollow, and deceptive. For what truth could there be in a magical illusion? So, whatever the kind of consciousness there is, whether past, future, or present, one's own or others, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, you inspect and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to you to be void, empty, and deceptive. For what authenticity could there be in consciousness? So these are the similes of the five khandas. The body or form like a bunch of froth, the bunch of froth or foam on the lake or on a river, and a Vedana like like a bubble. It's momentary and it doesn't last. It hasn't got any solidity at all. Our perception is regarded just like a mirage, and will, just like a banana tree, which got no essence in it, no solidity in the center of it, and consciousness is like um, a magician's trick. And just to finish off this talk, I always liked this sutta. This is from the again from the Samyutta Nikaya, still the Kanda Samyutta. This was the Madhyamaka. Okay. This was Sariputta was asking the Madhyamaka, do you regard the body, experience, perception, will, or consciousness as an enlightened one? No, Venerable, because Yamaka was thinking that an enlightened person exists after death. They don't just disappear. No, Venerable Sir, do you regard an enlightened one as within the body, as within experience, as within perception, as within will, or within consciousnesses? No, Venerable Sir. Do you regard an enlightened one as separate from the body, as separate from experience, as separate from perception, as separate from will, as separate from consciousnesses? No, Venerable. Do you regard the body, experience, perception, will, and consciousnesses taken together as an enlightened one? No, Venerable Sir. Do you take an enlightened one as one without form, without experience, without perception, without will, and without consciousnesses? No, Venerable Sir. The Yamaka, when an enlightened one is not apprehended by you as real and actual here in this very life, when you're actually living with the Buddha, is it fitting for you to declare that an enlightened one is annihilated and perishes with the breakup of the body and does not exist after death? If Yamaka there were to ask you what happens to an enlightened one with the breakup of their body after death, how would you answer? I would answer that the body is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering has ceased and passed away. Experience is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering has ceased and passed away. Perception is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering has ceased and passed away. Will is impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering has ceased and passed away. Consciousnesses are impermanent. What is impermanent is suffering. What is suffering has ceased and passed away. Good, Yamaka, good. And that was our Venerable Sariputta in the time of the Buddha. I hope I didn't discombobulate you with all of those teachings, because they were kind of, what would you say, deep. But those are the words of the Buddha. You can check them out for yourself. That's why we try and give the best translations as possible. But it's actually showing what these 5 khandas are. And these 5 khandas are what make you up. That's how you dissect. If you want to find out who you take yourself to be, everything is in one or other of those 5 khandas. And when you look at yourself as the consciousnesses, then it's nice to call them consciousnesses. It's much more accurate to the Buddha's teaching. And it is also allows you to see that only one consciousness occurs at one time. And from the other one to come, the one before has to disappear, has to cease. You see, this is just the coming and going of the different types of consciousnesses. And even the will. As you know, that it's great that these days there's been much investigation into the nature of the will. And what you might be mindful of and think that that's the will, that is not actually the will. By the time you can be aware of something which you associate with the will, which you even can call the will, which you sometimes mistakenly perceive as the will, the movement of the mind has already happened. The brain has already started before you are aware of it. That was the great work of Professor Lorber, John Lorber. No, not Lorber.
Libet.
But Libet, yeah. So much of what the Buddha was saying, all of what the Buddha was saying, gets kind of verified. That's the stories, the suttas of the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta and associated suttas to try and make sure that it's understandable. And it also is that first sutta which created fully enlightened beings in this era. And it was the sutta which I had the good sense to keep with me, to chant, to focus on, to investigate, to explore for 6 months without any interruptions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And if there's any questions, this evening?
Yeah. 7 this evening.
Yeah.
Ajahn, weren't you supposed to discombobulate us?
Of course. Otherwise, if I didn't discombobulate you, as I say, and take it a little bit deeper, I would not be doing my duty. So sometimes it's great to present these teachings as close as I can to how the Buddha presented them. And I know it's very nice that you were softened up beforehand by Ayachanda with metta meditation, which is lovely. But actually to see truth, it takes that from the safety you feel after loving kindness meditation to actually to go deeper. What is this body and mind from which we assume we exist? And why is it the Buddha was always talking about non-self, anatta, not me, not mine, other self? How can we really let go? But I did mention to Ayachanda that loving kindness is very beautiful, but it always based on, the first noun, love. And I always like the best form of love which I've ever heard of was the French form called love. And that's where in tennis, we're having, is the Wimbledon started yet? Wimbledon Tennis Championship?
You're asking the wrong people.
Okay, anyway, when I was young, we always used to hear about this time of the year, the Wimbledon Tennis Championships. And the word for 0 in tennis was called love. 15 love, 30 love, 40 love, love all. And that was just how they expressed the score in tennis. And I always liked the word luf, the 0, which was love. So I think that's the highest form of love. Emptiness. 0. Total disappearance. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, now what do we do?
Now we go and love emptiness. So the idea is not that we say, oh, this is useless, this is hopeless, this is nothing, there's nothing there, but that we increase the love because everyone's 5 khandas are out of control. In fact, we don't even own them. So what can we do but to be kind, be compassionate, and let go? So please let go of the computer screen for a while and have some tea, have some walking practice, relax, go on a walk, whatever you want to do. And we'll be back here at 6:30 with some meditation and more metta chanting. So enjoy your disappearing.
Love to you.
Can't give them nothing. It's not very generous.
I got nothing to give.
You've got lots of nothing to give.
So I'll give it freely.